RedLAC annual event from the 28th to 30th. The 13 RedLAC Congress gathers unique engagement and learning opportunities between our members, fund, strategic allies, donors, impact investors, government representatives, and the global conservation finance community to address the topic of Road to 2030, the role and added value of conservation trust funds in meeting global goals. We are conducting today a series of interviews with the organizers and sponsors of the events. Today is the turn to interview the World Wildlife Fund, one of the sponsors of the event. We are pleased to have today Esteban Brenes, Director of Conservation Finance at World Wildlife Fund. So the World Wildlife Fund has been a leading conservation organization for over 60 years. Its international efforts and to protect endangered species, the habitats, and to address global conservation issues have led them to work in around 100 countries at every level. So, I'm very pleased to have you today, Esteban. Can you tell me? Can you tell us more about the World Wildlife Fund and its role as a key partner of conservation trust fund in Latin America and in the Caribbean?
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. The WWF or World Wildlife Fund has been a partner with conservation trust funds, obviously in Latin America, but also globally. We help, create the first trust fund of this nature in Bhutan in 1990, that is still in existence. And in Latin America, we've been working since the early 90s as well on the development of conservation trust funds. In the early 90s, they were really important because many governments were, the institutional capacity of many governments in Latin America and the Caribbean was very weak. So conservation trust funds played a key role in management the resources raised for protected areas. Also, that was a very important time in the region because that's when the institutions from the governments were consolidating, and also they were creating and expanding protected area systems around the region. So for WWF it's always been a key platform to work with in the countries. I think there's been an evolution because now many governments have more stronger institutions. So I think the roles of trust funds have evolved too. But still, we are still working very closely with them. And also we also have supported the creation of both RedLAC and CAFE in Africa. So it's for us, it's great to see, after almost 30 years, the evolution of the trust funds and how they have become such an important platform. And also, I shouldn't also miss to say Asia as well.
That's great to hear. And yes, we are very impressed about, the work that's been done over the years. And we know that by collaborating with global players, the World Wildlife Fund has developed and delivered innovative solutions that protects communities, wildlife, and the places they live. What are the collaborations opportunities that can be identified in the RedLAC Congress in ensuring the sustainability in protected areas?
Mm-hmm. One approach the WWF has been developing, and now others, now jointly with other organizations as well, because obviously we're not the only ones, has been the project finance for permanence approach, which is pretty much to use a private sector approach on how do you manage and plan businesses. Protected areas are no different. And historically, because protected areas have been so dependent on government budgets, there was not much incentive to approach planning and implementation of protected areas in that way. And in the case of Latin America and the Caribbean, right now we are working on PFPs, as we call them, projects in Peru. There's one that was closed a couple of years ago. Now there's one that is close to completion in Colombia called Heritage Colombia, or Herencia Colombia in Spanish. And also we help create, which was actually my first project with the WWF, the Mesoamerican Reef Fund, the MAR Fund. So that to me is it's a fund that is very important to me because it was my first experience developing a trust fund. So it's very important. And there, I must say that it was in a way the pilot for a lot of the planning tools that we are using right now, because the Mesoamerican Reef includes 4 countries, 3 Spanish speaking, 1 English speaking, with different systems. So we develop a model in common for the 4 countries. So I think that approach has been very important because now we know better what kind of activities do we really need to do for conservation and how much they cost and project them over time. So it's not that to me, even though it's not like a new way of doing things, but it's new in the sense that it has been applied to protect areas. So I think that's been a very important strategy for us in the last 10 years.
Makes sense. I understand. And considering the current rate of species extinction and ongoing threats to biodiversity, such as climate change and unregulated commercial activities, what is the role of Conservation Trust Fund in meeting the 2030 goals?
Yeah, I think, and I think it's one of the topics in the, for this year's RedLAC. I think having more, engagement and close engagement with the private sector. Private resources are 98% of the money around the world. So if we don't really change how private funding or private finance is used, we're never going to be able to save or the planet, or at least to cure that, at least the ecosystems that make the life sustainable in the planet, continue. So I think that's one approach that ourselves, like in our organization, but I think trust funds also are trying to build, mechanisms over that. Also, secondly, because of the pandemic, which we cannot ignore, which has been sort of a double-edged sword in the sense that, on one hand, it has made us stop and rethink things. It also has, many countries in the region are right now going through a financial crisis. Protected areas have been severely impacted because of tourism. Revenues have gone down dramatically. So I think we should reconsider not only the engagement with the private sector, but also, and I know that it's one of the sessions, it's on multilaterals. There's been a lot of talk on debt, because many countries already were in high debt, but right now, even with COVID, it's even worse. So I think there's a whole debate, and that's part is going to be this a small commercial here, because I'm going to be in a panel that is going to address these issues about green recovery. And I think there's a lot that has been researched and discussed, but about this topic, and I think that's something that it's important if we want to accomplish the goals for the next 10 years.
It's very interesting how you mentioned the role of the private sector, and actually in the annual RedLAC Congress, we will address work with the private sector and the government, collaborative communication, and international accreditation. So this space will be a global platform for the exchange of knowledge on the way to the next negotiations on biodiversity and climate change. So how can organizations such as the World Wildlife Fund and Conservation Trust Fund work with donors, similar organizations, and the public sector to better address the critical biodiversity loss problems we face?
I think that it's very important that trust funds work very closely, in most of them are with the government in protected areas. Governments have a lot of say, especially in the marine space and in certain strict protected areas. But there's also a lot of stuff that needs to be done outside protected areas, because that's where the pressure points are happening right now. And I think that that's another, going back to the private sector, sort of approach. It's very important that there's engagement with the stakeholders outside protected areas, and be very clear about what are the priorities and what are the key issues that need to be addressed, which will help provide ideas and concepts with multilaterals and bilateral donors and private foundations. Because right now, in my experience, I feel that more and more conservation trust funds that have very clear goals, are the ones that do better, because what they're doing, in a way, it's their best fundraising strategy. But you need a lot of work to have, very clear goals, very good indicators. How do you monitor them? And it's something that many trust funds already do very well, but that's something that more and more donors are becoming more, strict on that. They want to know what they're getting for their money. So we need to, conservation trust funds and organizations in general, work in this space. We need to get better at that.
You are almost like a bridge. That's very interesting. Thank you so much, Esteban. And transforming the systems. So the system must involve in a wide range of stakeholders. Could you explain how the World Wildlife Fund is working to get various stakeholders to join efforts to protect the ocean, mitigate climate change, and combat the extinction crisis? How do you leverage them?
Yeah, well, we do, the DOF works by, goal teams. So we have different teams working on climate and on ocean space and food. So, we do, which is not all organizations like ours or NGOs do it, but we have teams of people working on policy with the governments. But also we do a lot of work with going back to private sector and to the because agriculture, extractives and agriculture are the biggest users of natural resources around the world. So we are more and more working with these sectors to try to make their operations more sustainable or sustainable as possible. It's easier said than done, because when you're tackling changes in supply chains, you need to involve many different people. And so, and that's something that we are used to. But for example, in the Latin America region, we're working with cattle, with the beef producers. We're also working with the soy producers. Now we're starting, we're exploring an option, which will be probably a trust fund with the rubber sector, which the bulk of that industry is in Southeast Asia, but more and more is becoming important in parts of South America, especially. To improve how natural rubber is produced. So I'll say that it's pretty much two big spaces: the policy side with governments, but also the private sector, especially on the supply chain side.
Very interesting. And so you mentioned how the situation this year with COVID and the drop of the touristy season and activity has impacted those combats. And do you think, unfortunately, that the COVID-19 pandemic has just given us the opportunity to accelerate this transition?
I think the whole debate is here. It is okay, if we are so dependent on tourism, we need to find ways to diversify. Everybody knows this for years, but it's becoming more urgent right now. How do we diversify? Secondly, the problem is that when governments are in a fiscal crisis, they're trying to look for sources of revenue, the faster way they can. And unfortunately, many governments, the temptation is to turn into extractives, so like mining, or certain kinds of agriculture or unsustainable fisheries and activities of that sort. So I think here we have the opportunity to try to really think longer or ahead about it. For example, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which historically never cared much about the environment because they said that it was not in their mandate, is now, they have what they call Chapter 5 evaluations of countries, so the fiscal policies. And in the more recent reports of that chapter 5, they're including climate as one of the factors for sustainability of the fiscal situation of countries. I recently reviewed a report on Belize, and that was like, had a full paragraph, which, even though it doesn't sound like a lot, coming from the IMF is a big deal. So I think that this lesson here is, we need to change how we think. Like, business as usual is not sustainable. And we need to, we cannot just go back to the, same old industries or sectors to get us out of the fiscal hole. We need to look for something different. And I don't have a solution, of course, but that's clear that it's not going to be sustainable. Not only sustainable environmentally speaking, but also it's not even economically sustainable. And this is where I think it's forcing governments to rethink how to tackle these issues right now.
I totally agree with your spirit, Esteban. It's definitely the road that we need to follow. And we saw that the Worldwide Fund is a part of the Global Goal for Nature, a group of organizations calling Positive Nature by 2030. Can you explain how positive nature can be applied in practice?
Yeah, well, it is what they're trying to underscore. There's been efforts in the last couple, 2 or 3 years. There's the Gupta report from the Treasury of the United Kingdom, and other reports from organizations. They're trying to, which is interesting, is trying to really make visible the value of nature and ecosystems globally. The Gupta report was very revealing on that regard, because it says that historically economy has always been divided in goods and services in a very separate way, and they made estimates that actually out of the global GDP, at least 30% depends on natural ecosystems or natural processes. So it's a third of the global economy, and if you consider indirectly the other goods, it could be even half of the economy that depends on nature. So the idea is to try to underscore the value of nature in a positive way, and how and why do we need to protect it beyond just being like an intrinsic value, or as many people have said, that it's a luxury for the rich. That I always we hear a lot that the poor people cannot eat nature. The problem is that without nature, food is no good, because you're not gonna, your health on the long run is gonna be threatened. So I think that's the whole point: is how do you make that visible? And there are so many, we can speak hours about this, because there are so many, issues and factors that play in. But the idea is to make that more visible as part of the mainstream economy of the world.
And and speaking of visibility, Esteban, so why the RedLAC Congress? Why this sponsors this partnership today? What would you say to the people who are listening to us? What would they find, and why they should attend?
Well, of course. Well, RedLAC and conservation trust funds have been a way of a new way of developing or managing resources for conservation. And I think it has become really a community of practice, in the region, and now even globally, that it has really shown that you can improve how you manage protected areas and conservation or natural resources in a more professional way. They always say that conservation and natural resource management is has been historically like 30 years behind the private sector. But the trust fund model shows that you can actually apply those practices into conservation in a more efficient way. So I think that it's every year there are new topics every year, all there's because I think one of the biggest values of RedLAC is that it's based on practice. This is not just theory. These are men and women every day working on conservation and managing resources going out, talking to donors, talking to the local stakeholders. And it's also very important that all the trust funds, because they're based in countries, they understand the local context, which is one of the biggest obstacles that many donors have. They don't really understand sometimes what's going on in a given country. And conservation trust funds could be, to your point, they can be a bridge between donors, private sector, and practitioners of conservation, and use those resources in a more efficient way. So I think RedLAC is a great school for learning all these things.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Esteban. That was the last question of today. Thank you, everyone, for attending the interview. Please make sure to register to the event on redlac2021.org. We thank you, Esteban, and the World Wildlife Fund.
Thank you.
And the co-host of the event, Funafilo and Forever Costa Rica. And the event will happen on September 28th to 30th. Please make sure to register, and we'll get back. We will talk to you soon, and we hope to see you all at the event on September 28th. Thank you so much, Esteban.
Thank